Hello everybody, hopefully everyone can hear me. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I think it's been 3 months since the last one, but my New Year's resolution was to be a bit more regular. So the idea behind these is a catch up with markets, what's going on in the major markets, where the opportunities might be, and all of that really. And the idea is to do it every week, on a weekly basis, as and when I can, be bothered. And that's it. So before we get into it all, we'll take a look at the usual mix. We'll have a look at stock market indices, gold, silver. I mean, a pretty phenomenal past month or so for silver, oil, Bitcoin, natural gas, a few other things. And if there's any stuff you want looking at, I should say, if you put it in the chat, we'll take a look at it when we're done. For the sake of good order, let's just do a risk warning. This presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones accepts no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets, CFDs, futures, foreign exchange work, and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Trading is risky. So that's that. I had a couple of emails asking where I was over the last few months, and I was still trading. I was still running the WhatsApp group. I just got a bit lazy doing the updates on YouTube, so I stopped. I took December off as well. So I wasn't really around much, but I thought, you know what, I should make a commitment to at least try and do it a bit more regularly this year. So I'm going to do this every Friday, and also there's the newsletter that I've been running for a few years, and again I haven't sent one out in a couple of months, but I'll do it over the weekend. So again, if I'll put the link up in a second. The only thing I'm going to ask anyone to do today, if you're not signed up to the newsletter, go and sign up to the newsletter. I'll put the link in the description of this video. It's free of charge. bit.ly/DJ email sub. That's the link for that. And I'm going to send out a newsletter tomorrow. I've been doing all my usual trading the last few months, but I've been trying an additional approach that I have done at various points over the years, and it has worked. A more medium-term trading approach for US stocks. I'm going to talk about that in the newsletter, and I'm going to run a webinar next week on that and my ideas for that. It's really, I'm not getting any younger, and I like not having to spend time in front of the screen. So it's a more medium-term approach to markets using US stocks. I'm sure, like plenty of us, I've got a pension and ISAs, and have a longer-term investment approach as well as the trading stuff I talk about on here, and it's a combination of the both approaches, so I'll talk more about it over the weekend in that email newsletter. Here's a snapshot of some of the US stocks. The US stocks I've got so far. My plan is to add 2 US stocks to a leveraged portfolio and just try and crunch out a regular profit. I mean, the best performer is Ross Stores has been the best performer so far. WAB was one I added this week. Westinghouse Airbrake Technologies, Citigroup is in there. That's done okay. So I'll talk about it though. So as I say, if you sign up to the newsletter, you'll get an update Saturday or Sunday with a bit more info on that, and I'll run the webinar next week. But I'm still doing all the other stuff I'm doing. I just haven't bothered doing YouTube for a few months. Let's get into it. What an interesting time it's been. Not so interesting in US stocks, actually. I think the last one of these I did was the middle of October, so in here somewhere. So it was what's that, 3 months ago. And the markets have pushed higher. This is the S&P 500, but not drastically higher. We are trading. It's pushed higher this week. We've seen a fresh all-time high, blah, blah, blah. So it is positive, but it's only just above the late October highs. So if all you watched was the US stock market and you haven't been paying attention for a few months, it probably feels like you haven't missed out by that much at all. And I think it's interesting, this disconnect, because if you look at something like the Spanish stock market, look at that the last few months. The Spain 35, this is perhaps the extreme comparison, but 15.6 to 17.6, it's done 2,000 points. So that's about, is that 12%? 12% or thereabouts since October. So massively outperformed US stock markets. And I do wonder if that is a theme for this year. I am still positive on US stock markets because despite all the stuff that we see going on in and from the US, stock markets are still going up. But European markets have performed a little bit better. We'll look at these in a bit more detail, but look at the FTSE, for example, the boring old FTSE. You know, since the middle of October, the FTSE's up about 800 points, so that's about 9%. So I wonder if the theme for this year, stock markets go up, but perhaps Europe is seen as the safer bet compared to the US. I don't know. That's just my initial thoughts. I'm not going to come out with targets or anything nonsense like that because I think they're pretty meaningless. But overall, US stock markets, I think, still positive. There is still that concern. Is AI, going to be a bubble? This is the Nasdaq 100. And even if there is a concern that AI is going to be a bubble, we're not seeing this market crash. It's been pretty boring. Again, we go back, fresh all-time high in the Nasdaq in October, and nothing since then. Pretty sideways since then. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But I'm not looking much at the Nasdaq at the moment because it's a bit too boring for me. And the Dow, all-time highs for the Dow. Again, earlier this week, I think, on Monday this week. So interesting, US stock markets, still interesting to me. I've still got a lot of my pension in US, mainly, S&P and Nasdaq exchange-traded funds. But I've been doing more European stuff over the last 6 months or so because we've had more strength in Europe. So I think that's really interesting to see how that all pans out this year. So that's the US. Let's take a look at some of these European markets. If you take a look at the DAX, the DAX had, let's just get all those drawings up. It had been a pretty sideways time for the DAX until the beginning of this year. The DAX hit a high in July and just kept banging its head there into the end of 2025. And we've had the breakout and the run this year. So I think that's interesting. We had a definite trend up in the DAX since those November lows. So overall, it's given back a bit over the last couple of days. But for me, that's still a positive market, the DAX. The Spain, there is a Spanish ETF that follows the Spain index. There's a few, aren't there? But the one I've got is that one, the Amundi IBEX 35, which trades on the London Stock Exchange. And that's had a great run following that Spanish index higher. Obviously it's only 35 stocks in the Spanish 35. The name gives it away a bit, but interesting that the performance of this market compared to US markets. So the Spain 35 is a European index. This is an interesting one for me from a trading and investing point of view, because it has been so strong. The Italian index, there we go. Fresh all-time highs earlier this year in the Italian 40. Not much follow-through since then. And what for me is interesting as well, even France, the dull old CAC 40, which set a high in May 24, blipped to a new high briefly in March 25, then again end of last year. We have had a bit more of a breakout on that. I think that's interesting to see how that develops. Whether we see this dip get bought on this pullback. So that you can see these European markets in the short to medium term have been stronger than the American market. So I think that's an interesting theme to watch this year. But overall, I'm still positive on US stocks and European stocks. Yes, there is that concern over AI. Is it a bubble? And blah, blah. But they're still going up. So let's see. So let's look at sorry, we didn't look at the Japan, did we? Japanese, the Nikkei, great run in the Nikkei. Again, all-time highs in the Nikkei this week. I haven't bought that. I keep meaning to buy it, and I keep forgetting. But a great run, broke out summer of last year through the July 2024 high. So that's the previous all-time high, I think. And what was that level? 42, and we're at 53 now. So that's done. Well, it's not quite 30%, is it? But it's probably a 25% move in the Nikkei since August of last year. So a great run there. So, stock markets are interesting, I think, going into this year. And I'm still positive. It's been a bit of a quiet start for the US, I think, this year. If we look at the hourlies on the S&P, we've been a bit, there's not that much difference between where it was on Boxing Day and where it is today. So we've been a bit chop. But overall, I think it's interesting if it can get some momentum. And I mean, 7,000 is the next hurdle on the S&P. If we can get some momentum and break through there, I think it gets a little bit more interesting again, doesn't it? So but it has felt like it's been a bit of a slow week this week, I think. But that could just be me struggling to get back into it again. So that's that. Let's have a look at the precious metals. We've got to start off with silver, haven't we? What a run in silver. Breakout end of November through 50, let's call it 55, keep the maths easy for me, and trades to 94 yesterday, or 93.69. So what's that? So 93.70 minus 54.50 breakout is a 39.20 move divided by 54.5. So a 72% move in silver since the beginning of December. Pretty much in 6 weeks. Crazy market. Is it sustainable? Who knows? But you could have said that back then when it was trading at 65. When it had done 20% in 3 weeks. Is it sustainable? Probably not. But it can carry on going. So it's an interesting one, silver. I missed out on most of the run in gold last year in my pension. I did because I didn't buy it. I was too focused on the S&P. So when I was away on holiday, I did buy a silver ETF. SSLN, I think is the code. There we go, SSLN. So this is the iShares physical silver that trades on the London Stock Exchange. Obviously, none of this is financial advice. So I did buy that on the 10th of December. And it's just gone nuts, isn't it? As the price of silver has gone up, it's gone nuts. And as usual, I just wish I bought a lot more and I could be retiring next week. So I think the question is, how far can it go? I mean, who knows? It's pretty volatile. If I was a buyer today of silver as a trade, where would I want my stop? I think at least the other side, and it's only Tuesday's low, at least the other side of 83.50, which does tie up with the old high from the 26th of December. I do think when the correction comes, it absolutely has the potential to be a really vicious one. Because there's going to be a lot of people perhaps late to the party who are going to panic sell. So I think it would be interesting when we do get a correction. But, it was only yesterday it hit another all-time high. So overall, I'm still bullish on it. I'll still be a buyer of the dip. Let's see what happens. But I think a shakeout would be interesting to see what happens. On silver here, and there's the trend. I mean, look, that's almost a perfect trend, isn't it? Since the 21st of November, it's a pretty textbook trend on silver. So interesting one to see what happens, but lots of focus. I was looking on Twitter yesterday and today. There seems a lot of people going short into this, which of course, in my view, is absolute lunacy. Short on the way up and getting blown out. It's always tempting, of course, to call a top on a market that's moved like this, but we are where we are in silver. Absolutely nuts. Can you explain what's going on with silver? Nope. I think anybody who tries to apply logic to a market that's up, what do we say, 71% in 6 weeks, you can't apply logic to it. There's talk of, I think initially there was talk of the Chinese have imposed export controls, is that the right thing? Whatever it is, on silver. There's a lack of supply of the physical. There's increased demand for it in industry. But either way, none of that really goes to explain a 71% rise in 6 weeks, does it? It's just, there's absolutely an element of FOMO, fear of missing out, because it's trading like a cryptocurrency, isn't it? So I think it's interesting, and as usual, I don't really care. I just want to try and make some money along the way. But I do think there will be a correction at some point, but maybe that correction doesn't come till November. Maybe that correction starts today. Who knows? But I think the trend's really interesting. But I think there's a lot of people getting burnt by trying to go short, and just too early on the shorts. Maybe this is the top and it starts to break down from here. But overall, for me now, I'd still be a buyer because that trend is up. But it is a crazy volatile market. I mean, if you look at the move in Boxing Day, it was, what did it touch? 83.75, and 5 days later was 70. Right, so 83.75. So it's a 1300 doodah move. Yeah, that's a 16% swing in 5 days. And then, of course, the market just ran away higher eventually. So I think it's a hard market to trade, but it's fascinating to watch it. So, and overall, because of that trend, I still want to be a buyer. So that's silver. That's the craziness of silver. Gold, a little bit calmer. But again, what's gold done since that breakout? I mean, much less dramatic. The breakout through 4.4, which was the previous high, pretty much. Broke out in December, and it traded as high as 4,650. So it moved 250. Was it 6%? 6% move, isn't it? So obviously, gold moved silver moved 10 times as much as that. But gold, again, the trend, gold had a great year last year. The trend has been up on gold, all the usual. So for me overall, I'd absolutely be a buyer of the dip in gold, in all sorts of time frames. If I was a buyer now based off the daily chart, I'd put my stop somewhere the other side of the low before the breakout, which was only the 31st of December. It's only like 16 days ago, So that's what I would do on that trade. A more aggressive stop, I don't know, perhaps the other side of 4,400, the 8th of Jan low. So I'd still be a buyer. It's been pretty sideways this week, isn't it? So it's interesting, isn't it? But what's also interesting is, of course, that gold and silver are traditional safe haven assets that do well when other assets are falling. And of course, we've still got stock markets going up. So you could say, looking at stock markets, there's still very much a risk-on approach. A weaker dollar helps gold and silver. But here's the dollar. The dollar's been going up for the last 3 weeks. This is the dollar index. So it's a strange time. It is a strange time in the world, full stop, isn't it? But it's a strange time for this mix of markets, stock markets, dollar, gold and silver. But there's no rule that ever said markets have to make any sense, and I just think it's an odd time at the moment. But there's always something odd going on. So that's it. I think interesting trends, those two. Bitcoin, as we're on the subjects of crazy currencies or currency replacements or whatever we want to call them, I think I've seen a lot of talk about again the demise of crypto, and I think some of maybe the smaller coins have been smashed a bit. But that trend in Bitcoin, for me, that's still up overall. If we look back 2 years, 2 and a bit years on Bitcoin, it hit 126, I think was the high, wasn't it? In October. Sold off since then. It sold off a fair old amount. It was more than a 30% drop in Bitcoin. But I'd say overall that trend is still up. It's been a bit boring since November. But I'd be a buyer. The closest I'd want my stop, probably the other side of the April 2025 lows. A more aggressive stop would be the other side of that sell-off low so far at 80,000. But I'd say overall that trend is up on Bitcoin. So that's that. Let's take a look at some commodities. I think copper's been interesting this year. We had that massive move in copper. If you were trading markets and watching, this is last summer, biggest one-day fall in copper, thanks to the US government imposing import tariffs on copper, and copper, a few days before was trading at 5.9, traded as low as 4.4. So what's that? It's like a 30% move, not quite a 30% move over the week or so in copper, but a massive fall there on that day. And I did wonder at the time, I should have done it, but I didn't do it. I should have bought a copper ETF, because I was thinking at the time, well, surely this is overdone and the thing's going to recover. And of course it has. And what's interesting, I think, again, this year, the price of copper has pushed to a fresh all-time high. So I'm quite interested in buying copper. At the moment, the closest I'd have my stop is the other side of 555, the low before the breakout. So yeah, I think that's maybe an interesting market for this year to watch. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that one. But I think for me it's quite significant that it's broke out to fresh all-time highs. But let's see how this year goes. What other stuff looks interesting? I think some of the currencies look a bit boring at the moment. If you look at, pound against the dollar, I mean, this is the daily chart. So pound against the dollar is trading pretty much where it was in April last year. A volatility along the way, no real direction. Euro dollar, let's have a look at the euro against the dollar. Again, look at that. That's trading, I guess it's April again, isn't it? Well, June last year. So not that much volatility really, is it? Over the last 6 or 7 months, euro against the dollar, not a lot going on there. I think some of the yen crosses look interesting, I thought. Sterling yen, I think that's an all-time high in the pound against the yen that started middle of December. It's pushed higher. It's selling off at the moment. So again, I think that's interesting to see where the sell-off stops. Euro yen, similar. I think, a euro yen broke out in October last year. Broke out again earlier this week. It's selling off a bit. I think they're, for me at the moment, because there are trends in these markets, they're more interesting than the euro dollar and pound against the dollar. So any market, I think, against the yen is quite interesting. And that's it, really. Oil is still boring, I think. Look at that. If we go back, let's take oil back to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, March 22. So nearly 4 years ago now, of course, isn't it? Nearly 4 years ago. The trend is down, I would say. We'd say since then. I think you could still make the case for the trend being down in oil, crude oil, US crude. Something like that. The lows from earlier last year, April 25, around about the mid-50s a barrel are holding. And it rallies, but it doesn't rally very far, So it rallied up to 62 and a bit this week, got slammed, but it's a bit of a drifty market, isn't it? So I think, I haven't traded oil for a while. I think overall I'd rather be a seller than a buyer. But if you look at oil over the last 6-7 months, there's not an awful lot going on, is there, in the price of oil? So that's it, really, I think. I don't think there's a lot more at the moment, anyway, to be said. For me, I think, stock markets are always interesting. US stock markets have been a bit ploddy, I think, the last few months. European markets, like the DAX and the old Spanish, have been a bit more interesting. Gold and silver in particularly, has been nuts. Right, let's see where that all ends and how that all ends, if it ends, or whether it continues. For me overall, I'd still be a buyer. So there's an interesting mix of things in there. I just think if all you were looking at was the US stock market, which I do spend a lot of my time looking at, it feels like a pretty uneventful couple of weeks so far into 2026. But I'm sure that'll change. So that's that. We'll have a look at a couple. I think someone's mentioned a couple of things you want looking at. So feel free to do that. What I would say, I'm going to expand a bit more on my trading approach for this year in this week's newsletter. So if you're not signed up to the newsletter's free. I run a WhatsApp group. I'm not going to talk about that today. But sign up to the newsletter, bit.ly/DJ email sub. The link is in the description to this video today. And I'm going to send out a video this weekend, newsletter this weekend with a bit more about my approach to trading US stocks this year, which is going to be a big focus, bigger focus for me. Yeah, do that. Can we have a look at Redwire Corporation? Let's have a look at Redwire. Redwire Corp, NYSE stock. What do they do then? Electronic technology, aerospace and defence. It's pretty volatile, isn't it? So let's have a look. So where were they last year? They were $26 and a bit last year. They traded as low as below 5 by November. That's pretty horrible, isn't it? What would you do? I would say, do you know what I would do? I would go short at the moment. If I had to do anything, I would be tempted to go short. We had this gap. I'm guessing that was on earnings, wasn't it? So this gap lower in August. They tried to rally. They couldn't crack 12. They tried to rally again just this week. Is that just this week? Yeah. Couldn't crack 12 again. So I would be a seller up here with a stop above 12. That's what I would do. You could make the argument, well, let's be a buyer because the trend is up. I think as usual, it depends on your time frame, doesn't it? The trend since early December has been up. So you could make the argument, well, I want to go with that trend and be a buyer. And, there are always two sides to every market. Personally, if I didn't have a position on, I would wait for the break if I wanted to go long to see if it can break 12. So I think it's interesting. Let's come back to it over the next couple of weeks. But overall, I'd be tempted to think, okay, the market doesn't see any value above 12. Can't get up there since before August last year. So my bet would be, it's going to struggle at 12 again. But let's see. I think if it breaks 12, different story, I think. But for now, I'll be interested in going short. That's it. Okay, so we're going to wrap things up there. I will commit to doing this every week. Like I say, the only thing I'd ask today, if you're not on the newsletter list, go and sign up to the newsletter. Links in below. Any questions about anything, you can drop me an email. I always say I don't have all the answers, but I've been doing this 30 years now. So not YouTube, obviously, but markets and stuff. So I always give you an opinion. Drop me an email, dj@davidjonestrading.co.uk. Otherwise, we're done for today. Yeah, so good luck with your trading. Let's see where the crazy silver price is in a year's time. And I'll be back for them. And any questions, let me know.